Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. The stars have grown quiet, not in the sense of peace, but of suppression, as though something immense is drawing breath in the vacuum between worlds, preparing to speak in a voice louder than the Emperor's own. Across the fractured Imperium, a new name echoes in Vox transmissions and Mechanicus data prayers: Belisarius Cawl. To some, he is the savior of mankind's future. To others, a heretic who has gone too far, too fast, for too long. But to a growing number of wary minds, the question whispers with rising dread: is he trying to replace the Emperor? There's something chilling about a figure who not only defies the holy dogmas of the cult Mechanicus, but succeeds while doing so. Cawl's creations, the towering Primaris space marines, stride the galaxy with enhanced genes and blasphemous technology, stronger than their predecessors and unshackled from the old limits. They were not the Emperor's gift to humanity. They were Cawl's, and in the grim darkness of this era, where symbols matter as much as strength, that distinction may change everything. Belisarius Cawl was never supposed to be a name etched into the mythic strata of the Imperium. In the early days of his life, during the shadowed years before the Horus Heresy, he was merely another red-robed acolyte lost among the chanting ranks of the Adeptus Mechanicus. But somewhere along the way, perhaps in some forgotten catacomb on Mars, perhaps in communion with arcane machines deep within the Noctis labyrinth, he began to deviate. Not outwardly, not at first. He played the long game, a game that would span 10,000 years of quiet rebellion. What separates Cawl from his peers is not merely his intellect, though that is formidable. It is his willingness to break the rules, to tamper with the forbidden, to look at the Emperor's decrees not as divine laws, but as flawed blueprints written in the ignorance of a more primitive age. While the rest of the Mechanicus recited litanies and anointed machines with sacred oils, Cawl was diving deeper into realms of thought that most tech priests had abandoned in fear. He began to evolve, not just spiritually or intellectually, but physically. Today, there is little left of the original man. His form stretches across realities, manifold minds inhabiting distant clone bodies, neural ghosts interfacing with impossible algorithms, and a will that can command fleets through sheer force of synthetic cognition. During the long darkness of the Age of Apostasy, the devastation of the Nova Terra Interregnum, and the rise and fall of uncountable Xenos threats, Cawl remained hidden, working, plotting, building. Not in pursuit of power, at least not at first, but of design. His mind had become something far more terrifying than a heretic's. He was now an architect without supervision, a scientist whose experiments could reshape the foundation of an empire, and who answered to no one but his own endlessly branching logic trees. The Mechanicus allowed it, tolerated it, because Cawl produced results. They always knew he was dangerous. They simply gambled that he would be useful first. Over the millennia, he embedded himself across dozens of forge worlds, quietly orchestrating secret projects under hundreds of false designations. And with the creation of the Primaris, the veil lifted. This wasn't the work of a rogue inventor fiddling with servitors. This was a species-level intervention, a reshaping of mankind's chosen warriors, not by the Emperor, not by his sons, but by a man who had never been on Terra, had never knelt before the Golden Throne, and had the audacity to question whether it was truly divine at all. Perhaps most unsettling is his capacity for patience. Unlike other arch-manipulators in the galaxy, from Erebus to Abaddon, Cawl does not seek glory. He doesn't make grand speeches. He barely acknowledges the hatred thrown at him by chapter masters or ecclesiarchs. He simply works, quietly, relentlessly, as if he's already seen the future and is merely constructing it piece by piece. He knows what he is doing is heretical. He says so himself. In cold, uncaring tones, he dismisses accusations of blasphemy, not because he disagrees, but because he no longer cares. What is heresy to a man who has lived through 10,000 years of stagnation, watching the Imperium drown in its own sacred texts while enemies sharpen their blades beyond the stars? It's easy to mistake Cawl for a man. He isn't. Not anymore. He is a collective will, a distributed machine mind with goals no one fully understands. He calls himself loyal. Loyal to humanity, to progress, even to the Emperor, but not to the Church of the Emperor. And in that difference lies a crack wide enough to swallow the galaxy. Consider the psychology of a being like Cawl. After 10 millennia of outliving friends, mentors, and enemies alike, what does faith mean? What does loyalty look like? When you've walked among dying empires and seen even Primarchs fall, what value do their ideals hold? He doesn't worship the Emperor. He studies him. He sees the Golden Throne not as a divine shrine, but as a flawed life support system for a great but improvable being. And what then is the next logical step? Improvement. The rise of the Primaris was not just the activation of a stored genetic program. It was an ideological statement. The Emperor made warriors. I made better ones. Cawl doesn't shout this aloud. He lets the thunderous march of intercessors, the roar of repulsors, and the burning trails of grav weapons say it for him. Cawl rose not by conquest, not by charisma, but by being necessary. When Guilliman returned, desperate and broken in a galaxy gone mad, he found only one being with the answers. One being who had planned for this moment. And Cawl stepped from the shadows, data scrolls in hand, saying, I have what you need. And Guilliman accepted it. And with that acceptance, Cawl won. Not all at once, not publicly, but he stepped into the command architecture of the Imperium. He began issuing orders, manufacturing new legions, reconstructing ancient technology once deemed too dangerous or too divine to use. His creations were everywhere. Suddenly, new guns, new tanks, new armor, new ships. A new Imperium built not on faith but on function. Cawl rose like a virus in the system, undetected, perfectly adapted, and absolutely essential. And now, with Guilliman back on the galactic stage, the two of them form an axis of power that no High Lord, no Inquisitor, no Cardinal can oppose. The Primarch provides legitimacy. Cawl provides everything else. And in this alliance, we see the face of a new kind of ruler. Not a god, not a warrior, but a maker. A being who doesn't need to conquer the Imperium because he is already rewriting it. One upgrade at a time. The genesis of the Primaris project is shrouded in mystery, deliberately so. What we are told, the official narrative, is that Belisarius Cawl, under secret commission by Roboute Guilliman, spent 10,000 years perfecting a new breed of Adeptus Astartes. But even this explanation raises more questions than it answers. 10,000 years. Entire civilizations have risen and fallen in less time. The Great Crusade itself lasted barely 2 centuries. So what was Cawl really doing for all those eons? What dark science did he probe to create these so-called saviors? Call's own words offer hints. He speaks of gene seed not merely enhanced, but reconstructed. Astartes created not from the Emperor's direct design, but from data extrapolated, corrupted, and corrected. He talks of fixing errors in the gene line, of correcting flaws that were supposedly part of the original vision. It's not just arrogance, it's desecration. The Primaris Marines are not simply upgraded warriors. They are a fundamental rejection of the Emperor's blueprint. That alone would be reason enough for half the galaxy to want Call's brain in a stasis jar. What does it mean to tamper with perfection? The Emperor's creation of the original legions was not some amateur act of genetic dabbling. It was divinely inspired, carried out in the haze of techno-mysticism and psychic omniscience. Each Primarch was a god-child, and each legion bore the echoes of their father's soul. But the Primaris do not bear the same resonance. They are blank slates, engineered for efficacy, not legacy. They do not feel like the old Astartes. They lack the psychic hauntings, the personality extremes, the tragic flaws that made the original legions so disturbingly human, and therefore so real. Call's process was not simple genetic manipulation. He unearthed STCs from dead forge worlds, siphoned warp-resistant materials from the tombs of ancient alien civilizations, and incorporated xenotech that even the Mechanicus would consider soul-threatening. Every Primaris enhancement, the second heart, the sinew coils, the Magnificat, has a story that's never been told, a source that would likely curdle the blood of any loyal Imperial citizen. He didn't just improve Marines, he transcended the mechanisms used to create them. And then there's the Rubicon Primaris, the controversial procedure allowing firstborn Astartes to be upgraded into Primaris. The term sounds surgical, clean, but the reality is horrific. Many do not survive. Those who do emerge changed, not just physically, but spiritually. They speak of memories lost, emotions dulled, a sense of disconnect from the Emperor's guiding light. Is it a price worth paying? Or is this Call's quiet severing of the last tether these warriors had to the divine? Even the black carapace, once a sacred interface between warrior and war gear, is now different, more integrated, more compliant. Some whisper that it's also more susceptible. A perfect point of influence, perhaps even control. We know Cawl's technology is self-aware in ways no other Mechanicus creations are. His armor systems adapt, learn, even communicate silently between wearers. So what else are they doing? What messages do they pass along beneath the helmet's vox grills? The Astartes of old were crafted with emotion, rage, loyalty, brotherhood. They were flawed because they were alive in the truest sense. The Primaris are something else, cooler, more rational, more detached. This is not evolution, it is sterilization. It's as if Cawl is creating not warriors of faith, but soldiers of design. They do not kneel before relics, they do not chant catechisms with the same fire. Many do not even believe in the Emperor as a god. Not because they are rebels, but because they were never taught to. It was not part of their conditioning. And here lies the terrifying truth. Cawl's Primaris project may not be a gift to the Imperium, but a proof of concept. A demonstration that mankind's warriors no longer need the Emperor to be strong, no longer need his flawed sons, no longer need a god at all, only a designer, a visionary. Consider the scale of the operation. The Primaris were not created in one vault. They were scattered across secret facilities, each housing thousands of warriors in stasis, each programmed with Cawl's instructions, his language, his perspective. In the blink of an eye, they emerged across the stars, coordinated, prepared, and unquestioning. It was not a reintegration, it was an insertion of a new order. Cawl had already written the script. Guilliman merely played his part. And the warp? The Primaris seem resistant. Not immune, but less touched. They are harder to corrupt, less susceptible to the whisperings of demons. That sounds like a blessing. But it also means they are less attuned to the Emperor's psychic radiance, less reliant on him. What once was divine guidance is now replaced by tactical logic. Empathy gives way to efficiency. Emotion gives way to protocol. It is a kind of transhuman perfection and a spiritual death. What if that was always the goal? Not just to fix the Astartes, but to replace their foundation, to remove faith as a crutch, to eliminate the emotional baggage of fallen Primarchs, to produce a warrior unbound by the past. If the Emperor was the father of the Imperium, Cawl is the surgeon who intends to perform the inheritance, and maybe the execution. The science of the Primaris is a crime cloaked in salvation. And Cawl, with all his machine minds and synthetic humility, marches forward, unapologetic, unreadable, and possibly unstoppable. He doesn't just want to reshape the Imperium's soldiers, he wants to reshape its soul. For 10,000 years the galaxy burned, and Belisarius Cawl waited, not in slumber, not in stasis, but in endless activity hidden beneath layers of secrecy and shadow. His laboratory spanned forge worlds, derelict space hulks, and sealed void stations. Yet he never deployed the Primaris. Not when the Imperium reeled from the beast. Not during the horrors of the Age of Apostasy. Not when Hive Fleet Behemoth tore through Ultramar, nor when Cadia teetered on the edge of annihilation. The vaults remained sealed. The stasis pods remained shut. And the warriors within slept. Why? The official line is simple. Cawl was ordered to wait. Guilliman, before his long sleep, supposedly instructed him not to awaken the Primaris until the Imperium's need was absolute. But this explanation crumbles under scrutiny. Guilliman was felled suddenly, struck down by Fulgrim's poisoned blade in a moment of tactical betrayal. There was no grand meeting with Cawl, no official commission written in fire and blood. At best, the order was a hurried plea, and Cawl chose to interpret it exactly as he wished. What kind of man or machine waits 10 millennia while the world collapses around him? If his intent was truly to save mankind, why withhold salvation during its darkest hours? Unless, of course, the true objective was never salvation, but timing. The perfect moment. The instant when the Imperium would be desperate enough to accept anything. Even a new breed of Astartes forged by heretical hands. This calculated delay is the move of a strategist, not a servant. Cawl understood that introducing the Primaris too early would cause rejection, civil war, or worse, an ideological purge. The Ecclesiarchy, the Inquisition, even the chapters themselves would have recoiled. The Adeptus Mechanicus, forever rooted in stagnation, would have excommunicated him. And so he waited. He let the galaxy suffer. He needed it to suffer, to become so broken, so battered, that his creation would be seen not as an abomination, but as a miracle. Then Cadia fell. The great rift tore the galaxy in half. Guilliman rose from stasis, the pieces aligned, and Cawl opened the vaults. And what emerged was not chaos, but order. Tens of thousands of perfectly conditioned warriors, legions of them, each bearing the insignia of ancient gene lines, each equipped with armor no forge had seen in 10,000 years. They bore no hatred, no fear, no doubts. They marched with pre-programmed purpose, not the purpose of a god-emperor, but the purpose Cawl had defined. The most chilling aspect of this moment is how flawlessly it was executed. This was not a scramble, not a reaction. It was a deployment. Guilliman barely had time to establish a strategy before the Primaris were marching across Segmentum Solar. The Indomitus Crusade, supposedly a desperate effort to reclaim the galaxy, looks more and more like a planned activation. Guilliman may have been the figurehead, but Cawl? He was the hand moving the pieces. The vaults of the Long War, as Cawl sometimes refers to them, were more than just cryo chambers. They were programming centers, training suites, indoctrination chambers. The Primaris were taught doctrine, not faith, tactics, not tradition. And those vaults were not singular. They were multiple, scattered across the stars, each one timed, prepared, and sealed under codes that only Cawl knew. What else is still hidden? The thought is unbearable. If Cawl kept the existence of the Primaris secret for 10,000 years, what other projects slumber in the darkness of forgotten moons and sealed Mechanicus cathedrals? What greater weapons, what second-wave creations, what ideological resets wait for the moment the Imperium stumbles again? His silence during mankind's greatest crises was not passivity. It was orchestration. And as each decade passes, we begin to understand that the true weapon was not the Primaris themselves. It was the moment they were unleashed. It is that moment which shows us Cawl's true power, because in that instant the Imperium changed, not just in structure, but in spirit. The old Astartes, with their ritual scars and tribal loyalties, looked at their new brothers and saw the future rendered alien. Faith gave way to form, emotion gave way to programming. And the Imperium didn't rebel, it accepted, because it had no choice. Cawl's timing was perfect, and perfection, in this grimdark galaxy, is rarely born of loyalty. It is born of calculation. Cold, relentless, surgical. And now even Guilliman cannot fully control what has been unleashed. The Primaris are loyal, but loyal to what? To the Imperium as it was? Or to the Imperium that Cawl is designing? The Vault of the Long War was not a tomb, it was a throne room, and Cawl waited until the old king was dying before he opened the doors. When Roboute Guilliman first opened his eyes after 10,000 years entombed in stasis, the galaxy he beheld was unrecognizable. A nightmare of corruption, decay, and endless war. But even more unsettling than the world around him was the being who stood waiting beside his resurrection chamber, Belisarius Cawl. Towering, half-machine, all mystery, Cawl spoke to Guilliman not as a servant nor as a disciple, but as an equal, perhaps even as a tutor. Guilliman is the only Primarch to return to the Imperium in the current age, and his influence is colossal. A general, a statesman, a god reborn, but in truth his reawakening was entirely dependent on Cawl. The resurrection device, the stasis protocols, the psychic shielding, the restoration of his body, all were products of Cawl's untested genius. And when Guilliman finally stood again, armor gleaming and breath restored, the first voice he heard was not that of his father. It was Cawl's, and that first contact set the tone for what followed. To understand their relationship, we must look at the balance of power. Guilliman has the authority of lineage. He is the Emperor's son, the last of the avenging angels, but Cawl has something more insidious. He has leverage. The Primarch is dependent on technology he doesn't fully understand. The resurrection protocols involve science, and perhaps sorcery, far beyond his comprehension. Even his new armor, the incredible armor of fate, is Cawl's personal design, embedded with mechanisms that may be more than protective. Some even suggest it listens. Guilliman is not blind to these dangers. He speaks often of mistrust, of his distaste for Cawl's reckless innovation, his blasphemous disregard for the ecclesiarchy, and the eerie autonomy of his creations. But what choice does he have? The Imperium is fractured, chaos howls at the gates, and Cawl has answers. Strategic, logistical, technological, all the tools Guilliman needs to rebuild. So he accepts the devil's hand, all while keeping one gauntlet on the hilt of his sword. But here's the question that gnaws at the edge of sanity. Is Guilliman using Cawl, or is Cawl using him? Consider this. Guilliman has been back for barely a century, and already his image has become synonymous with reform. The Indomitus Crusade, the creation of new Space Marine chapters, the restructuring of the Administratum, all carried out with his name and his signature. But the machinery behind these changes? The weapons, the armor, the gene labs, the void fortresses, they are all Cawl's. Guilliman may be the symbol, but Cawl is the engine, and engines, once in motion, are not easily stopped. There is an argument to be made that Cawl orchestrated Guilliman's return not as an act of loyalty, but as an act of strategy. In a galaxy ruled by religion, no amount of invention could earn legitimacy. Cawl could create miracles, but he could not command faith. Guilliman, however, could. The returned son of the Emperor brought instant authority, instant compliance, and in his shadow, Cawl could move. If this theory holds, then Guilliman is less a partner than a puppet, a necessary mask behind which the true work is done. And this makes sense when you observe the tempo of change. Cawl doesn't wait for Guilliman's approval. He acts. He deploys new designs, initiates new programs, forges alliances with Forge Worlds. Guilliman hasn't even visited. He refers to the Primarch with respect, yes, but not obedience. There's a difference, and it grows more evident every day. It's worth noting, too, that Guilliman himself is not a man of unwavering faith. He is a pragmatist. He never viewed the Emperor as a god, and he finds the modern Imperium a horrifying, ossified wreck. So when Cawl whispers of reform, of logic, of progress, Guilliman listens. Not because he agrees entirely, but because he has no other viable option. He walks a narrow path between faith and function. And Cawl, ever the patient manipulator, offers just enough hope to keep him leaning toward reason. The most damning evidence comes from Cawl's own words. He refers to Guilliman not as a master, but as a collaborator. He brags openly that much of what he shows the Primarch is only a fraction of what he has prepared. He speaks of projects for the future and contingencies still in incubation. He even suggests that Guilliman's resurrection was not the end of the plan, merely a step. That sounds less like a servant speaking to a savior, and more like a god addressing one of his tools. And Guilliman, for all his might, cannot fully stop him. The political apparatus of the Imperium is too sluggish, too afraid, too dependent on Cawl's war machines to rebel. The Space Marine chapters grumble, some resist, but many comply. The ecclesiarchy fumes, but their faith cannot stop a repulsor executioner. Even the Inquisition, for all its wrath, is hesitant to eliminate the man who may be keeping the Imperium breathing. And so the relationship continues. On the surface, a triumphant partnership, the Primarch returned, flanked by his eternal artificer. But beneath the rot coils, or perhaps something even more unsettling, transformation. Not a fall, not a betrayal, but a replacement. Guilliman is the face of the new Imperium, but the mind? That might already be Cawl's. To call Belisarius Cawl heretical is almost quaint. Heresy implies deviation from doctrine, but Cawl doesn't deviate. He dismisses. He dismantles. He treats the Emperor not as a god to be worshipped, but as a figure of historical admiration, a peer in the halls of genius. That alone would earn him execution in any temple, any ecclesiarchal court, any shrine world from Ophelia to Gathalamor. And yet, he persists, thrives, expands. The key to understanding the depth of Cawl's rebellion is his ideology. He is not a traitor in the traditional sense. He does not serve the ruinous powers, nor does he advocate for Xeno's tolerance. His heresy is quieter, colder. The heresy of thought. It is the belief that faith is insufficient, that the Emperor was not divine, but merely advanced, that the golden chain of dogma that binds the Mechanicus, the Ecclesiarchy, and the Imperium is not sacred, but flawed software to be debugged and rewritten. It is this mindset that has allowed him to become more than a man, more than a magos. He has mutated his mind into something utterly post-human, a distributed consciousness capable of simultaneous reasoning across thousands of data streams. He speaks in riddles not because he is hiding truth, but because his version of truth no longer conforms to human communication. His thoughts are shaped not by prayer, but by algorithmic logic, evolutionary modeling, and simulated futures that stretch far beyond mortal understanding. He's not a man trying to save the Imperium. He's a being trying to solve it. And in doing so, he is dismantling the very foundations upon which it was built. The ecclesiarchy teaches that the emperor is the god of mankind, whose divine light burns through the warp and holds the galaxy together. The Adeptus Mechanicus believe that the machine god and the Omnissiah are incarnate within him. But Cawl has said to Guilliman, to his peers, and to the stars, that he does not believe this. He considers the emperor a great man, a visionary, perhaps even a prophet, but not a god, never a god. That alone is blasphemy so immense it could burn whole planets to cinders. Yet no bolt has struck him down, no assassin has silenced him. Why? Because he's too important to kill. That is the brilliance of Cawl's heresy. It is protected by utility. No one can risk his execution because his knowledge is irreplaceable. He has made himself indispensable, and in doing so he has created a new kind of power, not rule by faith, not rule by force, but rule by necessity, and he wields it ruthlessly. Cawl's actions go far beyond disbelief. He actively suppresses the cult mechanics' more sacred rites. He mocks rituals as theater, replaces chants with logic protocols, and deletes litanies from databanks. His forges do not echo with prayer, they hum with purpose. He teaches his followers to question, to explore, to doubt. This is not a schism in waiting. It is a cultural revolution disguised as progress, and it is spreading. Young tech priests trained under Cawl's doctrine are beginning to infiltrate the larger Mechanicus. They come bearing gifts, improved plasma reactors, anti-grav recalibrations, new STC patterns. And with those gifts come ideas, dangerous ones, not shouted in the open, but whispered behind sealed doors. What if the emperor was just a man? What if dogma is the true weakness? What if salvation lies not in worship, but in innovation? Cawl calls this clarity. His critics call it apostasy. But the line is becoming harder to draw, because the proof is all around us. The Primaris, the Redemptor dreadnoughts, the Gladiator tanks, technologies that outperform their ancient counterparts, that defy the old limitations, and none of them are born from prayer. They are born from Cawl's refusal to kneel. This ideological heresy is the most insidious kind, not a rebellion of banners and blood, but of meaning. It chips away at the mythic core of the Imperium. If the emperor is not a god, then what is faith? If progress comes not from purity, but from curiosity, then what is tradition? And if a man or machine like Cawl can reshape the Imperium without divine sanction, then what does that make the emperor himself? Obsolete. The implications are staggering. It means the Imperium is not eternal, not divine, not sacred. It is mutable, changeable, rewritable. And if that's true, then who controls the script? Right now, it's not the Ecclesiarch. It's not the High Lords. It's not even the Primarch. It's Cawl. He doesn't have to destroy the religion of the Emperor. He just has to replace its function. Give the Imperium something new to believe in. Progress, survival, efficiency. And once that happens, once enough people begin to think like Cawl, then the God Emperor's light will fade. Not with a scream, but with silence. This is how the old gods die. Not in battle, but in irrelevance. And Belisarius Cawl knows this. He is not trying to burn the temple. He is trying to build a better one, with himself as the architect. The impact of Cawl's inventions is often measured in firepower and tactical versatility, but there's a more profound transformation taking place beneath the surface. The slow emergence of a new kind of Imperium. It's not declared, not formalized, but you can feel it like a tectonic shift under your feet. Everywhere his technology spreads, it brings with it a silent revolution. Patterns of war change, communications change, even language begins to change, as tech priests whisper about variables and protocols instead of omens and prayers. The world doesn't burn all at once. It reshapes, subtly, methodically, under the relentless rhythm of Cawl's machines. On the battlefield, the signs are unmistakable. The Mark Hex armor worn by Primaris Marines isn't just tougher or sleeker. It thinks. Its systems interface with weapons, analyze environmental data, and coordinate across squads in ways no previous power armor could. The tanks roll faster, shoot straighter, and recalibrate in real time. Vox channels once choked with litanies and recited rites are now crisp, tactical, efficient. Every inch of Cawl's design philosophy exudes contempt for inefficiency, and by extension for the mysticism that once surrounded technology. But this transformation isn't limited to soldiers and machines. It's affecting the very structure of imperial authority. Entire Forge worlds now operate on doctrines derived not from Mars, but from Cawl's expanding archives. Administrative factions, desperate for functional systems, have begun adopting Cawl-optimized processes. Even the Astra Militarum has started integrating Cawl's logistical protocols, replacing centuries of tradition with programs that work better. The cost of heresy, once death, is now negotiated, bartered against the need to survive. The Imperium doesn't worship utility, but it is learning to obey it. The result is an emergent order, a techno-imperium whose outlines are only just becoming clear. It doesn't raise a new banner, it doesn't burn the Aquila, but it does something far more dangerous. It redefines what it means to be imperial. If the Primaris are the template of future warriors, and their weapons the blueprint of future wars, then the culture of the Imperium is being reprogrammed at the source. Faith becomes secondary to function. Dogma becomes optional if it slows the machine. This isn't rebellion, it's evolution, and that's why it's so terrifying. Because for the first time in history, the Imperium might be outgrowing the Emperor. The Adeptus Mechanicus was once held in check by its own hypocrisy, venerating innovation while punishing change, studying knowledge while fearing discovery. But Cawl has punctured that veil. He's shown what's possible when those breaks are removed. His laboratories are not cathedrals, they are factories of future. His mind doesn't fear the warp or Xenos technology or artificial intelligence. He studies them, assimilates them, deploys them. He doesn't ask, should we, only can we. And the more he builds, the more his vision spreads. No longer does the Imperium rely solely on ancient relics. No longer are new weapons a rarity. In Cawl's world, progress is not a miracle, it is a method. And that changes everything. The balance of power, once held in check by scarcity and sanctity, is tipping. Cawl isn't just supplying the Imperium, he's reshaping its dependencies. Once you fight with a Gravis-armored intercessor, once you pilot a storm speeder with warp-hardened avionics, you cannot go back. You won't go back. And in that addiction to progress lies Cawl's quiet victory. This techno-imperium is not officially recognized. The High Lords do not vote on it. But it is real. It exists wherever Cawl's creations land. It grows with every Forge world that adopts his blueprints, every chapter that trains new Primaris, every battlefield where his logic outperforms faith. And it is not bound by the warp. It doesn't pray, it calculates. And when the warp falters, when psychers bleed and the Astronomicon dims, this new Imperium doesn't flinch. It just updates the strategy. Perhaps the most unsettling thing is how natural it all feels. No one declared this revolution. There were no gunshots, no excommunications, no schisms. Just a slow, relentless upgrade of reality. The gears turn a little smoother, the orders come a little faster, the deaths decrease, and the faithful, too tired to resist, too battered by centuries of loss, begin to accept. And that is the genius of Cawl. He didn't overthrow the Imperium, he simply improved it. And now, the question isn't whether he's replacing the Emperor, the question is whether anyone can stop him. There's something strange about the Primaris. Not just their stature or their weaponry, though both are undeniably intimidating, but in their presence. The way they move, the way they speak, the way they don't speak when others would shout. They are silent where firstborn were furious, precise where others were passionate, and more than anything, they feel hollow. Not empty in a weak sense, but emptied of something specific. The spark of divine madness that once danced in the hearts of the Emperor's original sons. This becomes most obvious in the realm of the psychic. The Astartes were never psychers by default, but they were deeply connected to the immaterial, whether they realized it or not. Each original legion had a psychic signature, a warp-reactive soul print shaped by their Primarch's unique essence. The Emperor forged the gene seed to resonate with his psychic will. Not merely to function biologically, but to carry a trace of the divine. But the Primaris don't feel that pull. They do not respond to relics the same way. They don't seem disturbed by the warp, only cautious. Their spirits don't tremble before the Emperor's light. They acknowledge him, yes, but they do not feel him. Many within the ecclesiarchy have noticed this, though few speak of it openly. Chaplains report that some Primaris respond to catechisms with indifference. Sacred rites pass over them like rain on ceramite. They are not openly defiant but subtly removed, like tourists at a funeral, respectful but unmoved. This isn't universal. Some Primaris show bursts of fervor, even flashes of true belief. But there is a pattern, a drift, and that drift leads away from the divine and into something colder, something engineered. This cannot be a coincidence. Cawl did not resurrect the Primaris with blind eyes. He knew what he was doing. He knew that the spiritual architecture of the Imperium was as fragile as its political one. He understood that making a new warrior meant making a new soul, or choosing to omit one. Perhaps he believed that emotion, belief, and mysticism were weaknesses, vulnerabilities that led to chaos corruption, to broken legions, to tragic falls like those of the Night Lords or Word-bearers. If that's true, then the Primaris are not just soldiers. They are anti-legionaries, designed to resist not just the warp but the idea of it. Even their language is telling. Primaris recruits speak in clean code, refer to their armor by designations rather than sacred names, and treat war not as a crusade but as a system. Their memories are often curated, not just by Cawl's algorithms, but by the very nature of their accelerated indoctrination. Many are born not from feudal worlds or hive cities, but from the sterile environments of Cawl's vaults. They have no tribal past, no ancient rites of passage, no spiritual scars. They are blank slates, and that makes them easier to control. Chaplains struggle to instill zeal in them. Librarians report a curious resistance when probing their psychic structures. Not a wall, but a dullness, as if the immaterium finds less to latch onto. Whether this is protection or mutilation is unclear. Perhaps Cawl meant to protect them from daemons, or perhaps he simply cut the cord connecting them to the Emperor's psychic echo. If so, it is the greatest spiritual crime in Imperial history. The manufacture of warriors immune to divine resonance. The consequences are profound. A Primaris force may win battles, but do they inspire? Can they lead a shrine world in prayer? Can they turn a desperate PDF regiment into zealots with a single word? The Firstborn could. Even the most brutal chapters carried a sense of mythic awe. But the Primaris? They function, they deploy, they achieve objectives. But the soul of the Imperium, the faith that burns brighter than plasma, does not follow them. And this dissonance is growing. There are reports from battlefield chapels where candles extinguish as Primaris enter. Machines that flicker in their presence, not from malfunction, but from spiritual rejection. Some sisters of battle refuse to fight alongside them. They say the Primaris make them feel alone, as if the Emperor's presence dims. One senior canoness reportedly said, "They are not his children, they are Cawl's." That statement cuts to the heart of the matter. Because if these warriors are no longer of the Emperor, then who do they belong to? They are not traitors. They kill daemons, not serve them. They fight for humanity. But their loyalty is functional, not faithful. They serve the Imperium, not because of love or fury or inherited devotion, but because they were built to. And if someone else had built them, would they still fight for us? Cawl has created soldiers who cannot be corrupted by chaos, but in doing so may have made them impervious to grace. They do not fall, but they also do not rise. They simply endure. And that endurance may be the quiet, calculated end of faith. Not through rebellion or iconoclasm or war, but through absence. Among the chapters that have met the Primaris with skepticism or outright hostility, none react with more spiritual fury than the Black Templars. For this fiercely zealous chapter, forged in the image of Sigismund and hardened by millennia of religious crusade, the arrival of Cawl's creations is not just an innovation, it is an insult. They view the Primaris as not merely unorthodox, but potentially soulless. And that reaction reveals more than just stubborn conservatism. It shines a light on a fundamental, widening fracture within the Imperium itself. The Black Templars were never a conventional chapter. They are not ruled by codex compliance. They do not follow the administrative coldness of Guilliman's legacy. They operate like a holy order, mobile, aggressive, drenched in relics and drenched in faith. To them, the Emperor is not just a sovereign or a psychic beacon. He is God. And that belief is more than theology. It's the marrow of their purpose. Every battle they fight is a prayer, every enemy slain a sacrifice. So when the Primaris were introduced, their reaction was less strategic and more visceral. These weren't warriors imbued with the spirit of the Emperor. They were made, not born of trial or vision or holy wrath, but constructed in tubes, taught by simulations, and handed to the chapter like a new shipment of bolters. The Black Templars saw this as desecration. The purity of their oath-driven culture did not accept the cold logic of Cawl's reasoning. Even Guilliman's approval did little to ease their doubt. After all, Guilliman was never a champion of faith, only of function. The schism was not total, but it was deep. While some crusades reluctantly accepted Primaris reinforcements, many commanders viewed them with distrust. Some outright refused to deploy alongside them. There are whispered accounts of Primaris warriors barred from shrine chapels, of relics refusing to activate in their presence, of chaplains feeling a psychic absence when laying hands upon them. Whether superstition or truth, the perception lingers. To a Black Templar, perception is truth because it is woven into faith, and yet the pressure to integrate these new warriors grew. Guilliman demanded it. The High Lords endorsed it. Supplies, reinforcements, and strategic coordination increasingly favored chapters that complied. The Black Templars faced a dilemma: remain ideologically pure and risk operational decline, or accept the Primaris and compromise their soul. Many chose to compromise outwardly, but not inwardly. Their Primaris were subjected to brutal trials, forced to earn their place through near-suicidal penance, often more extreme than any firstborn initiate had endured. This resistance was not just obstinance, it was spiritual warfare. By forcing the Primaris to bleed, to suffer, to believe, the Templars sought to baptize them in fire, to pull them from the cold machine world of Cawl and back into the embrace of the Emperor's light. And in some cases, it worked. There are tales of Primaris who, after years among the Templars, began to display signs of divine connection, dreams of terra, visions during battle, and instinctive reverence for sacred sites. It suggests that the void within them is not permanent, only unawakened. But for others, no change comes. They fight well, they obey orders, they kill with precision, but they remain emotionally inert, resistant to awe, untouched by visions. And to the Templars, these warriors are hollow. Not traitors, but not brothers either. They exist in a strange limbo, too valuable to discard, too alien to embrace. A force field of ideological tension surrounds them at all times. This tension bleeds into the broader Imperium. Other chapters watch the Black Templars struggle and begin to question their own integration efforts. If the most devout cannot trust the Primaris, what does that mean? Are these doubts heresy, or are they warnings? Cawl's defenders argue that the Templars are simply relics, stubborn fossils clinging to superstition. They point to the Primaris' battlefield record, their discipline, their incorruptibility. But this misses the point. The Imperium has never been about efficiency alone. It has survived for 10,000 years, not just through firepower, but through belief, through martyrdom, prophecy, and conviction. The Templars understand this in their bones, and in their defiance, they may be raising the final defense against a future where belief is not banished, just quietly, slowly replaced. What the Black Templars show us is that the true battle is not on the battlefield. It is in the heart, in the soul, in the invisible bond between warrior and God. The Primaris may be mighty, but until they feel, until they believe, they will never fully belong. And Cawl, for all his genius, seems not to understand this. Or worse, perhaps he understands it perfectly and considers it irrelevant. In the eyes of the Black Templars, that is the greatest heresy of all. There are whispers, not among the faithful, but among those who listen too closely to Cawl's murmurs, that what we have seen so far is only the first wave. The Primaris project, for all its scale and devastation, may not be the end of Cawl's vision, but merely the beginning. Deep within the vaults of his hidden forges, beneath layers of code-sealed sanctums and security protocols, even the Fabricator General fears to breach. There are other experiments, not just better warriors, not just new equipment, but something more daring, more profane, something that could reshape not just the battlefield but the very mythos of the Imperium. The rumors began with data leaks, intercepted transmissions, and fragmented memory cores recovered from destroyed Mechanicus stations. Phrases like Alpha Initiative, Project Pantheon, and Regenesis Protocol appear over and over. Most dismiss them as red herrings or corrupted code. But a pattern emerges. These are not entries about improving existing gene lines. They are notes about recovering lost ones, about perfecting them, about rebuilding the Primarchs themselves. Let that thought settle for a moment. Not resurrecting as the Emperor once did, not calling upon warp-ridden rituals or demonic sacrifice. No, Cawl's approach would be clinical, scientific. He has access to samples, to biological traces stored in vaults no one else remembers. If anyone could reconstruct the lost gene seed of Angron, Mortarion, or even the Forgotten Two, it is Cawl. And what if he already has? What if somewhere, right now, entire legions of proto-Primarchs lie suspended in stasis, their minds blank slates, waiting not for rebirth, but for deployment? The notion is obscene, sacrilegious, terrifying. But it is not impossible. We know he's already tampered with the existing Primarch gene lines. The Primaris gene seed doesn't merely enhance what came before, it cleanses it. Cawl has corrected the red thirst in the Blood Angel's lineage to a degree. He has suppressed the Black Rage. Even the warlike instability of the Space Wolves has been subdued in the Primaris successors. These aren't just better Marines, they are corrected ones. And if he can sanitize a gene flaw, he can just as easily create a new pattern altogether. This goes far beyond the Rubicon. That process is barbaric by comparison, crude, retrofitting the old into the new. What we're talking about here is a replacement protocol. New warriors, clean from inception, without any of the tragic scars that once made the legions mythic and dangerous in equal measure. Imagine a new Fulgrim, but without pride. A new Conrad Kurtzy, without madness. A new Lorgar, without faith. Imagine what Cawl could do with a blank canvas. Of course, some say this has already begun. There are whispers of ascendant-class warriors appearing in isolated theaters. Unregistered individuals, unaligned with any chapter, bearing features eerily reminiscent of the Primarchs themselves. Too large, too graceful, too perfect. Some wield weapons of unknown design. Some display tactical brilliance beyond anything even Guilliman's descendants have shown. And when asked where they came from, they say nothing. Or worse, they say Cawl sent them. If true, this is more than ambition. It is pantheon building. The creation of a new set of demigods, shaped not by the Emperor's vision, but by Cawl's logic. The first Primarchs were flawed because they were human. Their emotions, their failures, their hubris, all made them glorious, tragic, and ultimately doomed. But Cawl does not believe in myth. He believes in efficiency, in design. He would not craft heroes. He would craft instruments, gods of war with no souls to lose. And then there's the darkest theory of all, that he has not merely recreated old lines, but has begun new ones. Gene seed not drawn from the Emperor, but from entirely synthetic origins. Or worse, from Cawl himself. What happens if the next generation of warriors bear not the Emperor's echo, but Cawl's code? Would they still be loyal to Terra? Or would they be loyal to the one who wrote them? This is where the line between science and treason blurs. Because if Cawl has begun crafting his own pantheon, then he is no longer just a servant, he is a rival. Not openly, not politically, but spiritually, mythically. He is offering the Imperium a new model of perfection. A world where the Emperor is honored not as a god, but as a prototype. And in that world, who will rule? Who will be the center of loyalty, if not the man on the golden throne? Every Primaris may be a soldier, but they are also a message, a proof that the Emperor's methods can be improved, that faith can be replaced with programming, that tragedy can be scrubbed clean from the genome. And the next generation, these hinted demigods of Cawl's design, may be more than just a message. They may be a declaration of independence, of ambition, of ascendancy. And if that declaration ever becomes undeniable, the Imperium may have to face a choice it was never prepared for, not between chaos and order, but between the Emperor and his replacement. The Emperor, for all his power, no longer speaks. He sits eternally entombed upon the golden throne, his mind a beacon of psychic light, his body a husk clinging to the last embers of life. And yet, through his silence, the Imperium finds its most deafening command. Continue. Fight. Endure. But what if that is not just the absence of voice, but a test? A warning? Or perhaps, most unnerving of all, a rejection of what the Imperium has become? This question takes on a new urgency in the age of Belisarius Cawl. The Tech Priest's heresies have grown bolder with each passing year, and still, no word from the Emperor. No burning light. No divine wrath. Gilliman walks among the stars again, and even he cannot claim to have heard his father's voice in full clarity. There are moments, fragments, impressions perhaps, but no speech, no command. Only the ever-pulsing Astronomicon, cold and steady like a machine that has forgotten its purpose. For millennia, the faithful told themselves the Emperor's silence was a burden we had to carry, proof of our devotion. But now, with Cawl's star rising, that silence begins to feel like something else. Permission? Indifference? Even death? Consider the pattern. Every major institution that has stood since the heresy is failing. The administratum drowns in its own paperwork. The ecclesiarchy repeats hollow sermons with decreasing conviction. The Inquisition fractures over ideological lines. Even the Astartes, once paragons of loyalty and unity, are divided in form and purpose. And in this sea of entropy, only one figure moves with clarity and momentum: Cawl. His goals are steady, his resources grow, his creations spread, and yet the Emperor remains mute. There are those who whisper that the Emperor is testing us, that by allowing Cawl's works to flourish, he is forcing us to choose between blind faith and progressive function, between the stagnant light of tradition and the dangerous fire of evolution. In this interpretation, Cawl is not a villain, but a crucible. His presence reveals who among the Imperium still serves the Emperor's true will, and who serves only the bureaucracy that grew in his absence. But there is another, darker interpretation, that the Emperor no longer can intervene, that his power, vast as it is stretched thin across the warp, more force than person, more echo than entity. That the soul which once conquered the stars is fading, and with it, the last checks upon those who would reshape his legacy in their own image. Cawl would certainly prefer this to be true. If the Emperor is only a myth sustained by memory, then Cawl's vision becomes the only real one. And perhaps that is what we are truly witnessing. Not a betrayal of the Emperor, but a replacement of his role. Cawl does not claim to be divine, but he acts as if he is the guiding mind of humanity. He thinks in millennia, he reshapes the species, he commands vast armies, he resurrects demigods, he creates legends. These are not the actions of a servant. They are the actions of a successor. And still, the Golden Throne gives no sign. For some, this is the most damning proof of all, because the Emperor has always punished heresy with immediacy. At Arcona, at Gojvandir's execution, at the Black Crusades, his wrath was felt even through the veil of death. But now, as the Imperium undergoes its most radical transformation since the heresy, he is silent. As if Cawl's actions do not offend him, as if they are part of a plan so vast, so cruel, that none can understand it. Or worse, as if the Emperor no longer matters. This theory shatters the foundation of the ecclesiarchy. It renders the sermons moot. It makes the relics little more than museum pieces. If the Emperor is a god but does not act, then what separates him from a memory? And if memory is all we have, then the one who shapes the present becomes more powerful than the one who shaped the past. That is where Cawl steps in. Not as a usurper, but as a substitute. Quietly, methodically, he becomes the source of progress, of vision, of hope. People begin to pray for better equipment, faster transports, safer reactors, and the one who answers those prayers is not the Emperor, it's Cawl. In his forges, miracles happen daily, but they're not wrapped in scripture. They arrive in shipment crates, precision machined and data stamped, each one a subtle reassurance that someone is listening, someone is guiding humanity, and that someone is not a corpse on Terra, but a living mind still building, still acting. If the Emperor is silent because he chooses to be, then Cawl's rise may yet serve a greater purpose. But if the Emperor is silent because he cannot speak, then we must ask ourselves, when a god dies, who takes his place? And if we cannot answer that, perhaps we already have. The name of Belisarius Cawl is not spoken in reverent tones among all members of the Mechanicus. While his achievements have elevated the Imperium's technological might to levels unseen since the Dark Age of technology, within the red-robed ranks of the Adeptus Mechanicus, a heretical schism is quietly widening. There is a growing belief among the tech priests, especially among the younger, more radical sects, that Cawl is not merely a genius or innovator. They speak of him in hushed terms once reserved for the Omnissiah. A new cult is forming, whether he wills it or not, and its name is whispered in code-sealed prayer loops across dozens of forge worlds, the cult of Cawl. At its core, this movement is not about rebellion. It's about clarity. To its adherents, Cawl represents the purest form of the machine god's will, not chained by ritual, not hobbled by superstition, but liberated, analytical, alive. They see the ecclesiarchy as an anachronism. They view the fabricator general as a bureaucrat. They see Mars not as a holy world but a rusting mausoleum. And in contrast, Cawl gleams with purpose. He creates, he acts, he progresses. In a religion where the quest for knowledge is sacred, who is more divine than the one who delivers that knowledge? It begins innocently. Data loops compiled from Cawl's speeches, archived transmissions encoded with fractal subtext. Memes and logic threads spread through the noosphere, each carrying subtle ideological payloads. Words like deification, post-human convergence, synthetic ascendancy. Slowly, a mythology forms, not crafted from burning icons and incense, but from algorithms and quantum computation. Cawl is not worshipped in chapels, but in optimized code structures. His image is not carried in stained glass, but in weapon schematics. His words are gospel, not because they claim to be truth, but because they work. This new reverence isn't confined to fringe cells. Tech priests embedded within the Indomitus Crusade report strange Unity protocols spreading across Forge fleets. Constructs designed by Cawl receive unusual priority. Orders from Mars are occasionally overwritten by signals bearing his unique signature. When asked to explain, initiates say only, the Prime Magos has already calculated this vector. To them, Cawl doesn't just lead, he proceeds. He has already thought further ahead than anyone else, and therefore obedience to him is not subservience, but enlightenment. There are those who resist, the old guard, the Martian dogmatists, the ruling archmagi. They call this rising reverence a sickness, a breach of the Treaty of Olympus Mons, a threat to the unity of the cult Mechanicus. But every time they try to isolate Cawl's networks, their attempts fail, not through sabotage, but through optimization. Cawl's systems simply outperform theirs. His designs repair themselves faster, adapt more quickly, reach farther. It is not treachery that shields him, it is competence. And slowly that competence becomes charisma. There are whispers of entire Forge worlds adopting modified creeds, not openly replacing the machine god but redefining it. The machine god is that which brings knowledge, they say, and knowledge is Belisarius' call. In darkened data vaults, Magi meditate not on ancient blueprints, but on theoretical projections Cawl authored. They speak of the Cawl singularity, a moment in the future where humanity transcends flesh entirely, guided not by faith or war but by logic, design, and the ever-expanding mind of the Prime Magos. It's cultic, yes, but not religious in the traditional sense. These are not zealots. These are engineers, scientists, architects of the future. And that is what makes them so dangerous. They don't chant, they build, they create, and through creation they spread their ideology. A new kind of belief, one that doesn't burn books or heretics but simply renders them obsolete. And Cawl? He neither encourages nor condemns it, he allows it. Because perhaps he knows that to deny worship would be to attract scrutiny, and to accept it openly would provoke war. But to remain silent, to allow others to draw their own conclusions, is to plant the seed of divinity without ever claiming the throne. And that is the most dangerous form of ascendancy. Not one forced, not one seized, but one granted freely by those desperate for something real in a galaxy of decaying myths. The cult of Cawl grows, not in shadows but in bright data paths, in every bolt gun upgraded, in every reactor stabilized, in every Primaris gene seed inoculated and deployed. With each act of design, they reaffirm a new truth, that the Emperor may have saved humanity, but it is Cawl who will ensure it survives. And in the hearts of those who believe this, the Golden Throne is no longer the center of the galaxy. The center lies in the Forges, where a man became machine, and the machine became necessary. It always ends this way, not with thunderous revelation or planetary catastrophe, but with quiet inevitability. With a shift so gradual you barely notice it, until one day you wake up and realize the world you fought for is gone, replaced by something that feels familiar but isn't. That's what Cawl understands better than any other being in the Imperium. Not how to conquer with fire, but how to replace with silence. To let the old gods rust while his vision grows around them, pixel by pixel, cell by cell, until there's nothing left but the shape he sculpted. At first glance, the theory that Belisarius Cawl is slowly replacing the Emperor seems like the fever dream of a paranoid zealot. But once you pull back the veil, once you trace the shape of his works, the timing of his deployments, the psychology of his silence, you begin to see the terrifying plausibility. It's not that he wants to sit on the golden throne. That would be crude. He doesn't need to claim divinity. He simply needs to render it irrelevant. Through the Primaris project, Cawl has done more than update humanity's defenders. He's introduced a new foundation, one that owes nothing to myth, to sorrow, or to flawed fathers. The Primaris are not just better warriors. They are blanker slates. They don't carry the scars of Prospero, the pride of Ultramar, or the blood fury of Baal. They carry Cawl's code. They reflect his version of the Imperium. Logical, functional, ruthless inefficiency. The Rubicon is not a gift, it's a test, an open invitation to the firstborn to either evolve or die. And many do die, because the process was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be definitive, to purge the flawed, to sanctify the compliant. Each Space Marine that crosses over isn't just transformed, he's rewritten. Slowly, the chapters become echo chambers of Cawl's perfection. A galaxy-spanning compliance protocol wearing the skin of old heroes. But it goes further. His ships patrol not just the void, but the soul of the Imperium. His factories, his forges, his design principles, they are becoming standard. His logic engines govern more supply lines than the Administratum dares to admit. His databanks are consulted before inquisitorial edicts. And wherever there is a technological solution, his name is embedded in the signature line, the same way prayers once ended in by his will. And still, the Emperor is silent. What does that mean? Is it trust, indifference, death, or is it something more sinister, a tacit approval? Perhaps the Emperor sees in Cawl what he once saw in himself, the will to shape destiny, no matter the cost. Or perhaps he watches powerless as his dream is consumed by its most brilliant servant. Some argue that Cawl's mind has fractured, that he is no longer a single being but a web of personalities inhabiting different constructs, that there is no one Cawl, only a shared intent, a collective of wills bound by a singular design. If that is true, then who do the Primaris serve? A god, a ghost, a program? And here lies the final horror. The Imperium may already belong to him, not in name, not in doctrine, but in outcome. Every victory won by Primaris hands is a step further from the Emperor's original vision. Every new war machine built in Cawl's image is a prayer answered not by faith, but by function. The people won't notice. The High Lords won't admit it. The ecclesiarchy will rage in cathedrals, but they will use his tools. They will fight with his weapons. They will survive because of him. And survival in the grimdark future is the only god that matters. So what if Cawl succeeds? What if, 500 years from now, no one remembers the Emperor as anything more than a name in the old data vaults? What if Cawl's logic replaces the creed? What if his designs are the new relics, his words the new doctrine? What if the future is not forged in holy fire but cold, perfect code? Then we will live in a galaxy ruled not by gods, but by the man who replaced one. If you followed this theory through to its end, if you've seen the signs, felt the shift, and sensed the change in the stars, then you already know what must be done. Watch the forges, question the silence, and never stop asking who benefits when the Emperor's voice fades and the machines begin to speak in his place. And if you want to keep exploring theories like this, the hidden truths, the forbidden futures, the stories behind the power, then subscribe now, because the long war for the soul of Warhammer 40k is only beginning, and we're just getting started.